This is a poem about local Leicestershire legend Ada Lovelace, whose monument in Hinckley I am obscuring here. So, looking back, we find another one, of whom it must be said departed far too young. And although one of the century's pioneers, departed this life a mere 36 years, a lady, although born into wealth untold, was destined from the start to break the mould. Lord Byron's daughter, though 'tis sad to say, deserted as her father went his wanton way. Ma Lovelace then determined she would not allow her daughter that same furrow for to plough, and to shield her offspring was her single goal from all that sex and drugs and rock and roll. For mathematics, science, her mother said, would be the path that Ada would now tread. And for young Ada it was her intent that from insanity this would prevent a well thought out and very cunning plan, so she would not go bonkers like a dear old man. Little did she know her clever daughter would take unto it like a duck to water, and by those grey cells powerfully driven would conjure up that magic algorithm that even Mr. Babbage had no indication of his analytical engine's implications, and raised full many an eyebrow at the time that a girl in such a sphere could ever shine. Ada Lovelace.
Guten Morgen. This is the story of Rapunzel. Are you sitting comfortable? Then I begin well. Once upon a time there was a very handsome prince. He was also very large, und ich bedeute very, very large. He had the large head, the large belly, the large chesty, and the large buttockgelungers. This war because he was always eating the Sprangelburgers mit Freitiefreits und strugelgeblockten Zuckerpundings. In short, he was very, very fat. Only nobody except the peasants dared say it because he was very big, and he had the big sword and the scary Hundesmut. His name was Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgesonkel, and the people of the land called him Fatty Michael, or Fatty Mick for short. And they lived in a great schloss in a very, very dark and dunkel wilde wood, in a land called Stonkenwonkenstecker. He was also very, very rich. He kept all of his Bugelstacker gesunken in a box unter seinem Bett. And every night, when he was not admiring his physog in the mirror, he would count up his Bugelstacker gesunken and stick it back in the box under the bed and lock it up with the great big chain and the padlock and schmidt. He had a very, very nasty doggy called Hundegenasch, but it was really the very nice doggy. But because he looked so wild, everybody ran away when they saw him. He also had an horse called Oscar Wild, which was also not very, very wild, but thought that he was, and also thought he was very, very clever and pretty and strong. In shortingness gefragt sein, he was very, very dumm und very, very up his own strudel geteilt. Also, as I already mentioned have, Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgelsong was very, very fat, and his horse Geweild had already had the 4 hip replacements and was propped up on the wheels under his sagging belly whenever they went out. And of course, whenever Oscar saw the Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgelsong coming, he would try to hide behind the Hundegenasch. But as I said, he was also very, very dumb. So when Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgelsong said, "Oh, he has such a pretty and strong and clever little horse," he would get all floaty and trot off to the Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgelsong like a little Kindersprung. However, when Prince Michael von Strudelmacher Tinkeltonkel Geborgelsong jumped on his back, he soon realized his stupid Heisenkite was a very, very, very weaky linky in his fuselage. Also, as I already gesagt habe, Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge-Gesang had a very, very long sword. It was so long that he could not get it into this cupboard without climbing on the ladder, and even then it dragged along the floor behind him. Anyway, one day he set off, anders gesehen not very, very well, from the Schlosse mit die nice Hundegenasch, Genasch by their side. After they had for the many miles geritten been, Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge thought he heard the Mädchen calling for the Hilfe. Hilfe mich! Hilfe mich! He thought he heard her shout. She is calling me, he thought. How does she know my name? I must help her, and sort it out. And he got out the Satnavi and spurred the Osgewald into sort of a schnellier walkie. And mit Hundegenasch by their side, they followed the source of the screaming for about 8 hours of going round in circles mit the backward tritty-trotty. At last they came to a gross tower, which was very, very high. And at the top of the tower was a very schönes mansion. And she was shouting, Hilfe mich! Hilfe mich! And Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mick for the short, thought she was calling him, and he shouted back, Ja, ich bin hier, and ich werde dich helfen. The schöne Mädchen had however become very deaf because of all the screaming, and she had not spotted Fatty Mick. Now the tower was surrounded by the swans and the Bratenbulls and the knifey Speikenberger Plinky-Plonks, and they were under a very nasty spell, and they screamed and groaned and lashed out with their Sprungelschaftgebronkes. But they were no match for Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mick for the short, and his sword and the Hundemott Genasch, and they gnashed and schweipt and gnashed and schweipt, and in moments they had gekloven the Spreikenberger Plinky-Plonkes into bits and pieces. Now the Mädchen was still screaming, Hilfe mich, from the top of the tower. And Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mick for the short, shouted, I am here, I am here, schönes Mädchen, and I am going to save you. But still she could not hear, so he got out his great big loud inhaler, and switched it on and shouted, It is Fatty Mick, and I am here, you deaf bitch, he wanted to say, but he restrained himself. Now the whole wide world could hear this, and so did the wicked witchy, what had stuck the Mädchen in the tower in the first place, and she set off to see what was happening. Anyway, the Mädchen now heard the Mick, and went, Oh, thank God, I am saved, ich bin gesaved. Now, Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mick for the short, shouted up, How do I get to the top of the tower to save you? And the Mädchen could not hear, and she said, Sie warte. And Prince Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mick for the short, shouted again, How do I get up the tower to save you? Sie warte, she said, and stuck her hand to the ear. Wieder Prinz Michael von Strudel-Marketinkel-Tonkel-Geborge, also known as Fatty Mickey for the short, got the loud inhaler again and shouted, How do I get up the tower? Again he wanted to shout, You deaf bitchy, but he restrained himself. At last the Mädchen understood, and she shouted down, You must say, Rapunzel, lower the panties. Lower the what? Shouted Fatty Mickey. You must tell me to lower the panties, she said. Lower the panties, shouted Tonkel Strudel-Marketinkel, und so weiter. And she pointed to the great piles of hairy strangle growing from the sides of her head. At last he understood, and shouted, Rapunzel, lower the panties. See what he shouted, the Mädchen. Lower the panties, you deaf dumbcock, he wanted to shout, but controlled himself, and said even louder, The panties. Ah, the panties, she said. And suddenly down from the tower came the panties.
This poem is about a bombing that took place in Loughborough in 1916 when Zeppelins came into the Midlands. Quite a terrifying experience for people who weren't used to even seeing aeroplanes in the sky. The bombs dropped right near to where I now live, and many people were killed. these three people, the girl there was writing a letter, and when her father came back from the war, he found his wife and 2 children were dead. Zeppelin war damage. I'm looking at the pock-marked wall in Loughborough where the Zeppelin did its damage in 1916. A reminder of that day when, as this lasting memorial etched into the bricks, engineering met flesh. People ran out to see the monstrous airship above their heads, and then that split second when the bombs split the air, when 2 young children and their mother were blasted by the bomb, their lives ended. In the doorway of the corner shop, shrapnel embedded into the chest of the curious shopkeeper and killed him, left him bleeding to death on the shop floor in the arms of his 14-year-old son. Whose anger was it that was expressed in that act? Was there hot-blooded anger, or was it a cold-blooded carrying out of the German government's will, a job to do? When war machines are built, we know their intent, the ultimate purpose. But people whistled while they were assembling guns and constructing tanks. Girls chatted and giggled to their friends in the munitions factories. Men thought of their girlfriends and football while they made the bombs. And what was for lunch while they designed and constructed the airship? And then one day the engineering meets flesh, and lives are never the same again, and lives are cut short, somebody's daughter, somebody's son, and lives are never the same again.
This little poem came about following a remark made by my sister as we came away from my mother's funeral. It was up in the morning at 4 o'clock to walk to work in the mist. He was the village co-op baker, ne'er day'd missed. Up the lane to the bakehouse door, hard by the churchyard gate. Fire up the oven, get it hot, the village bread to bake. Well, the dough is mixed and risen, bread tins filled just so, all into the oven, so it's time enough for a brew. Well, kettle's on, tea's all brewed. He turned around to find, in his haste that morning, he'd left his milk behind. Well, there was no need to go without, he'd just pop across the way. Old Bill would be up and about this early in the day. So he knocked the door in his baker's whites and he's covered in dough and flour, while mist still swirled round the churchyard at this early hour. Footsteps could be heard just then along the churchyard way, some fella on his way to work so early in the day. Then was heard a strangled cry of horror and of fright, and footsteps running headlong in the early morning light. The poor chap had mistaken Pa for the churchyard wraith, all in white in that morning mist, so he'd run in fear and haste. Well, Pa went back to his baking, for the village needed bread, wondering just who it was who'd run in fear and dread. Well, the gossips put the word around, all round the village of Quorn, but no one ever did own up that they'd run that misty morn.
This is a poem called Hair. Hair, spangled in the belly of the moon, egg-bearing, harbinger of Easter, the moon goddess, lop-eared and long-limbed, springing into spring and spring-bringing, wild-eyed, purse-lipped and donkey-featured, doped up, insane with joy, driven, unkempt, hooray-henried and wildly whiskered, gangling and awkward, bonkers and yet deceptively articulated, leaping, dodging, wheeling, lurching, drifting, braking, then accelerating, then static, soppy-eyed and staring. Hair.
Besides my mother's bed there hangs a pair of ballet shoes, a mere 4 inches long from heel to toe, and but a mere inch wide. Soft grey leather sole topped black with white elastic strap, to keep them on a small child's feet. So what may she think when she woke in the morning to see such a delicate sight? Her daughter's first steps into this world, her first attempt to dance, her inability to skip round the brownie toadstool, her first performance on stage. Or would she see the playful child full of energy and mischief, the running child, the bounding child, the child that would not sit still, the child she nurtured all those years and watched her grow to adulthood, vetted her first boyfriend, let out for her first dance, let go to university to dance at her first ball, lost in her own world, away from home, away from sight, to dance her own tune. Lost. Just old memories, lingering.
Now, as you know, Prince Tinkle Tonkle and so weiter was a big man. Now, let's be honest, he was a great fat bingaloren, but he went at the panties like a dervish swirling, and he got to the top of the tower in no time, although he was sweating like a Schweinbaumklager, when at last he swung over the battlements. And as soon as he swung his great buttergelungen over the battlements, Rapunzel threw herself into his great big arms, and he fought his way through the hairy panties, till at last he found her lips, and they kissed, and before the long, it was getting very hot indeed, Geburt. Now, while this was all going on, the witch came by, and she saw that the Spiken-Speikenbergi plinky-plonks had been geklonked and gekloven, and that the pandy was hanging down from the tower. Then she saw Oscar sie not very wild, and the Hundemut genasch, sie not very fierce, hiding behind the town. She gave them such a schreckliche look that they both ran off like the shitty of the sticky. Now the witch began to climb up the pandy as quiet as she could. Now when she got to the top of the battlements, she saw that the Prince Tinkle Tonkle and so weiter, and the Rapunzel were caught up in the bit of the heavy petting, and she thought she could climb out without them noticing. But nein, Prince Tinkle Tonkle and so weiter spotted her, and pushing Rapunzel aside, he went for his sword. But it was so long he could not get it out of its scabbard. Round and round he went trying to feel the sword, but it would not come. The witch began to scream and to cackle and frightened Rapunzel so much that she fell back onto the bucket that she was using for her lavatorial needles, what was perched on top of the battlements. And oh my God, the contents slided out of the witch's face, and she was so shocked by the inner contents dripping down the forty nose that she lost her balance and she fell backwards down the tower, closely followed by the remainder of the lavatorial excrementals, and then I'm afraid by the heavy metal lavatory bucket. As soon as she hit the ground, first came the slithery contents. "Oh!" she screeched. And then down came the lavatorial bucket. "Ah!" she screeched. Just then Prince Tinkle Tonkle and so weiter freed his mighty sword. But as he pulled it out of the mighty scabbard, he lost the grip, and it flew over the side of the battlements, and stuck the witch right through her wicked heart. "Ah!" she screamed again, but for the last time. Seeing that the wicked witch was dead, Oscar, sie not very wild, and Hunde genasch, sie not very scary, came out running and pretending to look very brave, and that they had not run away in the first place. Then down the panties came Prince Tinkle Tonkle and so weiter, followed by Rapunzel. Once she realized she had to cut off the pandy and tie them to the battlements in order to climb down. Then off they went through the pokey, sticky bramble spikes, what were now trying to be very nice, since the spell had broken been. "Come and see this way," they said, all grovelmacken geboren, and sprang back to let them through. And for the next 10 hours they getrotted and getritted backwards and forwards, till they at last arrived back home. And back at the Schloss in Stonken-Wonkenstecker, the peasants were very, very happy to see the fatty Mick on his schönes Mädchen, and he carried his Rapunzel over the moat into the Schloss. That night he took his schönes Mädchen into the wedding bed, for they got married sehr schnell and across the land. All the night long, all they could hear was, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, take down the pandas. And because he was whispering in his very sexy way, Rapunzel was still very deaf and not used to his roughy dialect, and the sexy Vista kept saying, the what is, the pandas, you deaf bitch, he wanted to say, but he did not. And if at last she cleared out the arrows, and thank God she finally untergestood. And that is the end of the story. Except Rapunzel made Prince Fatty Michael spend all his Bugelstacke gesunken on the poor peasants, and so they came to love him and his schönes Mädchen, the airy Rapunzel. She also forbade him from riding the Oscar Wilde, and so he had to walk everywhere and lost the loads of fatty Grundgeschorger. No more Sprangelbergers mit Freitiefreits und Strugelgebrockten Sunkerpuddings. So Oscar was able to retire and did not need his four-wheel belly gesprungen anymore. Also Rapunzel genitted the Hunde Ganache, a very yellow pullover, and dyed the arrows pink, and then all the kinder loved him and wanted to play with him. And so they all lived happily ever after. The end.
Come, all ye would-be poets, who put your thoughts in rhyme, who string your words together, become legends in your time. Oh, let us one and all bow down to the greatest of them all. For what is life if we can't read the writing on the wall? You can keep your Blake, your Wordsworth, your Shelley and your Keats. Stuff your T.S. Eliot and your Benjamin and your Yeats. Salute the new poet laureate. Let's see his name in lights. The modern metaphysical who can put the world to rights. So let's raise a glass to the great Kilroy. Let's all shout out his name. They seek him here, they seek him there, but the painter's work has been in vain. There's many a time that I've sat here, unable to refrain, trousers round me ankles, laughing like a drain. He's no bog-standard rhymer, he should be on Channel 4. He'll tell us Sharon is a slag and Tracy is a whore. Watch out for limbo dancers, of Jacques Cousteau beware. And don't bother with the chewing gum from the machine that's over there. Let's raise a glass to the great Kilroy. Let's all shout out his name. They seek him here, they seek him there, but the painter's work has been in vain. There's many a time that I've sat here, unable to refrain. Trousers round me ankles, laughing like a drain. So take your hats off to the king. He's no flash in the pan. He's always on the scene when there's a job to be done. There's balls by Picasso and LOAQIC, and it's oh so droll with a toilet roll made from sociology degrees. So let's raise a glass to the great Kilroy. We'll all shout out his name. They seek him here, they seek him there, but the painter's work has been in vain. There's many a time that I've sat here, unable to refrain. Trousers round me ankles, laughing like a drain.